The word Shia comes from the Arabic term Shi'at Ali, meaning the supporters of Ali. This usage is historically attested and initially carried no theological meaning. It referred to Muslims who believed that Ali ibn Abi Talib, the cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad, was the most appropriate figure to lead the Muslim community after the Prophet's death. When the Prophet Muhammad died in 632 CE, the Muslim community faced an immediate and unprecedented crisis. This moment is historically uncontested. No clear procedural instructions for political succession had been publicly established, and the community was suddenly without its central authority. In the immediate aftermath, a group of senior companions gathered at a location known historically as Saqifa. This group included members of the Ansar of Medina and several prominent Muhajirun. After discussion and debate, Abu Bakr was pledged allegiance as Caliph. This event is historically attested, though the nature and inclusivity of the gathering are interpreted differently by later traditions. At the same time, another group of Muslims believed that Ali ibn Abi Talib had a stronger claim to leadership. Their reasoning was based on several factors: Ali's close familial relationship to the Prophet Muhammad, his early acceptance of Islam, his role within the Prophet's household. Importantly, at this early stage, there was no separate Shia religion. There was no alternative caliphate declared. There was no theological doctrine of imamate. Ali himself did not lead a rebellion or establish a rival authority. These points are historically reported, though later Sunni and Shia traditions frame Ali's response differently in emphasis and tone. Ali initially withheld public allegiance, a fact that is historically attested, though the length and reasoning are debated. Eventually, Ali pledged allegiance to Abu Bakr, prioritizing communal unity over political contestation. This pledge is widely recorded and acknowledged by early historians. The disagreement at this stage was political, not doctrinal. No one claimed that Abu Bakr was divinely appointed, and no one articulated a formal belief that Ali held divine authority. The Quran itself did not specify a successor, and arguments were grounded in precedent, proximity, and communal stability, not revelation. Over time, memories of this leadership dispute hardened. What began as a political disagreement gradually evolved into distinct historical narratives, then into theological interpretations, and eventually into separate religious identities. But at the moment of the Prophet Muhammad's death, the divide was real, human, and political, not religious law. Understanding Shia Islam therefore requires beginning here, not with doctrine, ritual, or later polemics, but with a leadership crisis in a rapidly growing community navigating succession without precedent. This foundational disagreement did not immediately divide Islam into sects. It planted the seeds for a division that would unfold slowly, shaped by later conflicts, especially during the Caliphate of Ali and the events that followed. Only by recognizing this gradual development can the emergence of Shia Islam be understood accurately, without myth or distortion. Ali ibn Abi Talib became caliph in 656 CE, following the assassination of the third caliph, Uthman ibn Affan. This transition is historically attested and marks the beginning of what is known as the First Fitna, the first civil war within the Muslim community. Ali's caliphate immediately faced opposition. This opposition was not theological and not based on doctrine. It centered on unresolved political grievances, specifically the demand for justice regarding Uthman's assassination. Uthman had been killed in Medina by rebels, and many influential figures believed that the perpetrators had not yet been punished. One of the earliest and most significant challenges to Ali's rule involved Aisha, the widow of the Prophet Muhammad, along with two prominent companions, Talha and Zubair. This episode is historically attested, though motivations are interpreted differently in later traditions. Aisha, Talha, and Zubair did not initially oppose Ali's legitimacy as caliph in principle. Their stated position, according to early historical accounts, was that justice for Uthman must be established before political stability could be restored. They believed that delaying punishment risked normalizing political violence. Ali, on the other hand, faced a complex reality. He inherited a fragmented state with unrest across multiple regions. Ali's position, which is also historically reported, was that immediate punishment was impractical and potentially destabilizing, as the identity and affiliations of the rebels were entangled within the broader population. These opposing priorities led to armed confrontation, culminating in the Battle of Al-Jamal in 656 CE, also known as the Battle of the Camel. The battle is named after the camel that carried Aisha during the conflict. The Battle of Al-Jamal is universally recognized as the first major internal armed conflict among Muslims. It is historically attested that Ali led one side, Aisha, Talha, Zubair were on the other. The conflict resulted in significant loss of life among Muslims. Talha and Zubair were killed during the battle. After the fighting ended, Ali treated Aisha with respect, ensured her safety, and arranged for her return to Medina. This conduct is widely reported, though later narratives emphasize different aspects of the event. The Battle of Al-Jamal had lasting consequences. It shattered the assumption that internal disputes could be resolved without violence and deepened political divisions within the community. Following this conflict, Ali's attention turned to Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, the governor of Syria and a relative of Uthman. Muawiyah refused to recognize Ali's authority until justice for Uthman's death was carried out. This refusal is historically attested and formed the basis of the next major confrontation. The conflict between Ali and Muawiyah culminated in the Battle of Siffin in 657 CE. This battle is historically attested and represents a turning point in Islamic history. Like Al-Jamal, Siffin was not a religious war. It was a political struggle over legitimate authority, responsibility for Uthman's assassination, control of the Caliphate. During Siffin, arbitration was proposed as a means to halt further bloodshed. Ali accepted arbitration reluctantly. This decision is historically reported and widely viewed as politically damaging to his position. It led to internal fragmentation among his supporters, including the emergence of groups who rejected arbitration altogether. The arbitration failed to resolve the conflict and weakened Ali's authority further. Political instability continued until Ali was assassinated in 661 CE, an event that is universally accepted in Islamic history. Taken together, these events demonstrate that the First Fitna was driven by human political conflict, not by doctrinal disagreement. The involvement of figures such as Aisha, Talha, Zubair, Ali, and Muawiyah reflects a community struggling to govern itself after the loss of the Prophet Muhammad, without a clear, universally accepted mechanism for succession. These conflicts did not immediately create sects, but they laid the groundwork for later divisions. The memory and interpretation of these events would later become central to Sunni and Shia historical narratives, shaping identity long after the battles themselves had ended. Ali ibn Abi Talib was assassinated in 661 CE while leading the Fajr prayer. This event is historically attested and uncontested. The man who carried out the killing was Abd al-Rahman ibn Muljam, a member of a group later known as al-Khawarij. His motivation was rooted in political radicalism and rejection of arbitration, not loyalty to Muawiyah or the Umayyads. Ali's assassination marked a decisive turning point. With his death, the possibility of restoring unity under his leadership ended. Following Ali's death, his eldest son al-Hasan ibn Ali was acknowledged by many in Iraq as the next caliph. This recognition is historically attested. However, al-Hasan faced overwhelming political and military pressure from Muawiyah, who controlled Syria and possessed a stronger, more unified power base. Rather than prolong civil war, al-Hasan chose to abdicate the caliphate in favor of Muawiyah. This decision is historically documented. The agreement included conditions meant to preserve peace and prevent bloodshed. Al-Hasan did not rule long, and he withdrew from political life. Al-Hasan later died in 669 CE. His death is historically attested, but the cause is disputed. Some later Shia traditions claim he was poisoned, while other historical accounts do not provide definitive evidence. As such, responsibility for his death cannot be established with certainty. With Muawiyah firmly in power, a major transformation occurred. The caliphate shifted from a system of selection and consultation to hereditary rule, as Muawiyah designated his son Yazid as his successor. This shift is historically attested and widely recognized as unprecedented in earlier Islamic governance. Supporters of Ali and his family did not disappear after these events. However, at this stage, they were still not a separate religious sect. Their loyalty was political, centered on opposition to Umayyad rule; emotional, rooted in perceived injustice toward the Prophet Muhammad's family; historical, shaped by memory rather than doctrine. The decisive rupture came with the events of 680 CE. When Muawiyah died, his son Yazid assumed power. Hussein ibn Ali, the younger son of Ali and the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, refused to pledge allegiance to Yazid. Hussein's refusal was political and moral, not doctrinal. He challenged Yazid's legitimacy, not the concept of Islam itself. Hussein traveled toward Kufa after receiving letters of support, but he was intercepted by Umayyad forces near Karbala. What followed is historically attested and uncontested. On the 10th of Muharram, Hussein ibn Ali was killed at Karbala, along with a small group of family members and companions. The killing was carried out by forces loyal to Yazid's administration, though Yazid himself was not physically present. Responsibility is therefore attributed to the Umayyad state, a conclusion accepted across historical traditions. For Shia Muslims, Karbala became the defining trauma. Hussein came to represent moral resistance against tyranny. His death symbolized injustice inflicted upon the Prophet Muhammad's family. Loyalty to Ali's lineage transformed from political allegiance into religious identity. From this point onward, Shia Islam began to crystallize as a distinct theological tradition, centered on martyrdom, suffering, and loyalty to the family of the Prophet Muhammad. This transformation was gradual, not immediate, and developed over generations. In summary, Ali was killed by al-Khawarij, not by the Umayyads. Al-Hassan abdicated to prevent civil war and died under disputed circumstances. Al-Hussein was killed at Karbala by forces loyal to Yazid. Shia identity emerged after these events, shaped by memory, injustice, and loss. What began as political support evolved into religious doctrine, driven not by revelation, but by history. At the center of Shia Islam stands the family of the Prophet Muhammad, particularly through Ali ibn Abi Talib and Fatima al-Zahra. Fatima was the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad, the wife of Ali, and the mother of al-Hassan and al-Hussein. In Shia belief, she holds a uniquely elevated position as a symbol of purity, moral authority, and the continuation of leadership through the Prophet's household. Historically, Fatima lived only a short time after the Prophet Muhammad's death. Her life, disputes, and death are historically reported, though accounts differ in emphasis and interpretation between traditions. In Shia theology, Fatima is not viewed merely as a historical figure, but as a foundational link through which legitimate religious and political authority is believed to flow. From this lineage, Shia Islam developed the doctrine known as the Imamate. According to Shia belief, leadership of the Muslim community was not meant to be determined by consultation, political power, or majority agreement, but by divine designation through the family of the Prophet Muhammad. This doctrine is theological, not historical. It reflects belief rather than a verifiable historical process, and is not explicitly established in the Quran. Within Shia belief, the Imams are direct descendants of Ali and Fatima. Each Imam is appointed by the previous Imam. The Imams possess special religious authority to interpret faith and law. The Imams are considered morally protected from error in religious matters. Over time, different Shia branches formed, each recognizing a different line of Imams based on where succession was believed to continue. The largest Shia group today is the Twelvers, who recognize a line of 12 Imams: Ali ibn Abi Talib, Al-Hassan ibn Ali, Al-Hussein ibn Ali, Ali Zayn al-Abidin, Muhammad al-Baqir, Ja'far al-Sadiq, Musa al-Kazim, Ali al-Rida, Muhammad al-Taqi, Ali al-Naqi, Hassan al-Askari, Muhammad al-Mahdi. According to Twelver belief, the 12th Imam, Muhammad al-Mahdi, entered a state of occultation and will return at the end of time. This belief is doctrinal, not historical, and is not stated in the Quran. Other Shia branches include Ismailis, who diverged after Ja'far al-Sadiq and follow a different line of Imams. Zaydis, found primarily in Yemen, who recognize a shorter line of Imams and differ significantly in theology and law. Alongside the Quran, Shia Muslims rely on distinct hadith collections that differ from those used in Sunni tradition. These collections emphasize narrations attributed to Ali, Fatima, their descendants, and the Imams, rather than a broad range of companions. The most prominent Shia hadith books include Al-Kafi, Man la yahduruhu al-faqih, Tahdhib al-Ahkam, Al-Istibsar. These works were compiled generations after the Prophet Muhammad, just as Sunni hadith collections were. Shia hadiths do include chains of narration, sanad, and named narrators. But Shia methodology places greater trust in the authority of the Imams themselves, which historically reduced the emphasis on extensive narrator criticism compared to Sunni hadith sciences. This difference is methodological and theological, not Quranic. In summary, Shia Islam's structure of religious authority rests on loyalty to the family of the Prophet Muhammad, belief in divinely appointed imams, reliance on hadith traditions centered on that lineage. These elements develop gradually through history, shaped by political conflict, trauma, and evolving theology. They represent a religious system formed through historical experience and belief, rather than a framework explicitly laid out in the Quran. Understanding this distinction is essential to understanding Shia Islam itself. Hadith traditions centered on that family line. These elements grew gradually through history. They reflect a religious system shaped by historical events and theological beliefs, rather than one directly defined by the Quran itself. Over centuries, Shia legal and ritual practices developed along a path distinct from Sunni tradition. These differences emerged gradually as Shia communities relied on their own legal authorities, hadith collections, and interpretations tied to the Imams. Examples of these differences include variations in prayer posture and form, the regular combining of daily prayers, different legal rulings related to marriage, inheritance, leadership, and authority. All of these practices are historically developed. They are not explicitly prescribed by the Quran itself, but arose through later legal reasoning and communal tradition within Shia scholarship. One of the most visible and emotionally charged Shia practices today occurs during Ashura, the annual commemoration of the killing of Hussein ibn Ali at Karbala. Ashura occupies a central place in Shia religious life because Karbala is viewed as the ultimate symbol of injustice inflicted upon the family of the Prophet Muhammad. During Ashura, some Shia communities engage in mourning rituals such as chest beating, self-flagellation, in some cases, bloodletting rituals. These practices are not universal among Shia Muslims and are internally debated. Many Shia scholars strongly oppose physical self-harm and permit only symbolic expressions of grief, while others allow more extreme practices as acts of devotion. None of these rituals are commanded by the Quran. Shia participants who engage in chest beating or self-flagellation often explain these acts as expressions of grief, remorse, and collective guilt. Within Shia historical memory, there is a belief that the Muslim community, particularly those in Kufa, failed to support Hussein when he stood against Umayyad authority. The mourning rituals are therefore seen by some as a way of symbolically sharing in Hussein's suffering and expressing regret for that historical failure. It is important to emphasize that this understanding is emotional and devotional, not legal or Quranic. The Quran does not prescribe ritualized mourning, bodily harm, or inherited guilt. These practices reflect how historical trauma, memory, and identity shaped Shia religious expression over time. In summary, Shia differences in law and ritual, including Ashura mourning practices, developed through historical experience rather than revelation, communal memory of Karbala, theological interpretations centered on suffering and martyrdom. They represent post-Quran historical expressions of faith, not obligations established by the Quran itself. Today, Shia Muslims make up roughly 10 to 15% of the global Muslim population. Major populations exist in Iran, Iraq, Azerbaijan, Lebanon, Yemen. Shia Islam today is not monolithic. Both Sunni and Shia Islam accept the Quran as revelation and as the foundational text of Islam. However, over time, each tradition developed distinct methods for determining religious authority, leadership, and practice. In matters of religious sources, Sunni Islam relies heavily on hadith transmitted through a broad network of companions, compiled into collections such as Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. Shia Islam relies on hadith transmitted primarily through the family of the Prophet Muhammad and the Imams, compiled into collections such as Al-Kafi and related works. These differences are historical and methodological, not Quranic. Both bodies of hadith literature were compiled generations after the Prophet Muhammad. Regarding leadership after the Prophet Muhammad, Sunni tradition treats leadership as a political and communal matter resolved through consultation. Shia tradition treats leadership as divinely designated through Ali and his descendants. The Quran itself does not explicitly establish either framework. Over centuries, differences in law, ritual, prayer practices, legal rulings, and commemorations developed within both traditions. These differences are historically traceable and culturally influenced. None of these variations are explicitly mandated by the Quran. In ritual commemoration, Shia Islam places central importance on Karbala and Ashura. Sunni Islam acknowledges Karbala historically, but does not ritualize mourning in the same way. Both responses represent post-Quran historical reactions to the same early events. From a Quran-only perspective, the Quran presents itself as complete, sufficient, and fully detailed guidance. It does not designate political successors to the Prophet Muhammad, nor does it establish hereditary religious authority, imamate, or a companion-based religious hierarchy. The Quran consistently emphasizes that judgment, guidance, and legislation belong to Allah alone, and it places righteousness and accountability above lineage, scholarship, or historical proximity to the Prophet Muhammad. From this perspective, the Shia doctrine of imamate is not Quranic in origin. The Sunni elevation of hadith collections as binding religious authority is also not Quranic. Ritual practices involving self-harm or inherited guilt are not sanctioned by the Quran. Sectarian identity itself is not endorsed by the Quran. In fact, the Quran condemns sectarianism explicitly and associates dividing the religion into sects with shirk, because it replaces devotion to Allah alone with loyalty to groups, labels, and inherited identities. Allah said in chapter 6, verse 159, "Indeed, those who have divided their religion and become sects, you have nothing to do with them. Their affair is only with Allah. Then He will inform them about what they used to do." Allah also said in chapter 30, verses 31 to 32, "Turn to Him, be mindful of Him, establish the prayer, and do not be among the polytheists, among those who divided their religion and became sects, each group rejoicing in what it has." From a Quran-only viewpoint, both Sunni and Shia traditions remain heavily anchored in historical conflicts of the first generations, treating political disputes, personal loyalties, and traumatic events of the past as defining elements of faith today. While these events are historically significant, they are irrelevant to the core guidance of Islam. Yet they continue to serve as the main reason for division among Muslims. For Quran-only Muslims, this leads to the conclusion that Sunni and Shia Islam are not fundamentally different in principle. Despite their disagreements, both have developed parallel forms of Islam that go beyond the Quran, shaped by history, politics, and tradition, rather than revelation. This conclusion does not deny history or identity. It restores a clear distinction between revelation and tradition, and highlights that Islam, as defined by the Quran, is not meant to be lived through unresolved conflicts of the past, but through guidance that remains relevant for every generation. The Quran remains the undisputed guidance for all Muslims, yet it has increasingly been sidelined in favor of sectarian narratives and inherited loyalties.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.
We're not here to issue fatwas or change anyone's beliefs. These videos simply reflect our own understanding and perspective. Our goal is to inspire you to think, reflect, and read the Quran, just as Allah commanded, and discover the real Islam for yourself.